Ahoy, mateys. We're at the Brock Environmental Center in Virginia Beach, and with us today we've got Chris, who is a senior scientist with Chesapeake Bay Foundation and Save the Bay. Save the Bay is one of their slogans. You'll see it on the bumper stickers. They're all kind of interacted together. Is that right, Chris?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
In some ways, right. Save the Bay is really our mantra, and people know us by that in some ways better than the title of our organization, which obviously is Chesapeake Bay Foundation.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about, I know you just came out with a report on the health of the bay.
Sure. So our State of the Bay report we do basically every other year, and it's really a concise way of helping people answer that question that we always get asked, which is, how is the bay doing, in any given year? And prior to us starting this report, over 20 years ago now, before that, it was, you had to look at these different government reports, you had to go read this or that, and we just realized there was a real need to put all that information into a fairly concise document that people could understand and read in a few minutes. And so the report's kind of divvied up into three primary sections. One, pollution, because most people know pollution is bad in some way, shape, or form. The next section is habitats, and I think most people know that those habitats are in there are things that make the bay healthy in some way, shape, or form. It's those underwater grasses we like to see during the summertime. It's the trees, the buffers we like to see along the edge of the water. It's what we call resource lands, which are lands that haven't been developed, that have a big impact on the bay's health. And then the last section is the one that I'm most fond of because I'm an angler and love to eat seafood, but it's fisheries. And it's not only a great indicator of the health of the bay, but it's also the part of the report where I think most people have their fondest connection to the Chesapeake Bay. Whether you like to go out and pick blue crabs during the summertime, or whether you like to go out and eat oysters during the wintertime, or throughout the year you like to go out and catch a striped bass. Those different indicators are in the report, and I think people always really connect with those indicators no matter what they like to do or what parts of the bay they're on at any given time.
Now, over the last year and a half, we've seen a lot of dolphins in the bay.
Right.
And it's exciting, guys. Normally you got to go out on the ocean for that. We were out sailing last year, and I got these little guys just jumping on. Is that good for the bay?
I don't know if it's necessarily good for the bay. I think it's great for people who like to experience the bay and all its wonders. When you go out and see dolphins, everyone's happy about it. It's what it amounts to. Whether they're 2 years old or whether they're 78 years old, they enjoy seeing that. And so, I think there's a couple of things going on. Obviously, one, I think the dolphin population is doing well, so we're seeing more in this region.
Okay.
There's probably some climate change impacts to that too. Warmer waters, we're seeing them longer throughout the area. From our perspective, though, one of the things that we like to point out when we think about dolphins is the fact that one of their biggest food sources is menhaden. And the menhaden fishery here in the Chesapeake Bay region is the largest fishery really on the Atlantic coast. And lots of work has been put in by Chesapeake Bay Foundation and other groups to try to make sure we have both a healthy population of menhaden and also healthy predators like dolphins that are dependent upon the menhaden population. And so that fishery is had somewhat of a tortured management history in Virginia, but we're continuing to work on that to make sure that we have a well-managed fishery, healthy menhaden population that can serve as the food source for those dolphins, and everyone can continue to see those.
All right. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, it is.
On the Bay Report, and I read through it, I thought it was really a lot of great information. It looked like things are getting better.
Generally, things are moving in the right direction. That's what we tell people. Our big goal at Chesapeake Bay Foundation is to make sure we speed the pace of that improvement over time. As you saw in the report this year, some of the water quality indicators stayed the same. Some of them did actually get a little bit better. Nitrogen and phosphorus, those are our two really big pollutants when it comes to Chesapeake Bay. People think about nitrogen and phosphorus mostly when they're thinking about their garden. Those are nutrients.
Yeah.
It's what it amounts to. And like most things, in the right amount, they're a good thing. But when we have excess nutrients, we end up with these algal blooms during the summertime, the kind of greenish water people see sometimes down here in the lower bay. It's more of a mahogany color, but those are algae blooms that show us we have too much nutrients actually in the water. And those algae are really microscopic plants, so they bloom in mass. and then unfortunately they'll die in mass. And when they do that, they sink to the bottom, and as they decompose, they use up a lot of the oxygen in the water column, and that's what some people have heard of as the dead zone. Happens especially during the summertime. So that's really a driver of that. And so the nutrient pollution in Chesapeake Bay is really driven by what's coming off the land and into our waterways, especially in the springtime. You know, our spring storm events push those nutrients and sediment as well, basically think about dirt, into our waterways, and then as the waters warm up in the spring or in summer, those really warm waters that we have in July and August are really conducive for those algal blooms to happen, and then we unfortunately have the negative side effects of those dead zones or other hypoxic areas in the bay. And that's one of the big things we use to monitor the health of the bay, is how big is that dead zone in any given year.
Now, what can be done to help reduce that?
Sure.
I mean, I know in Pennsylvania they were putting some buffer zones in on some of the creeks and things like that, but I mean, there's a lot of shoreline here.
There's a lot of shoreline, and the good thing about when it comes to helping restore the bay, you know, everyone has an ability to help in some way, shape, or form, and we can do things all throughout the watershed to make it happen. And so I'll in one way kind of start on your lawn, and you know, think about planting native plants in your lawn. They're more regulated to grow in the area where you're living. They don't require as much water, as many nutrients as fertilizers. You know, converting some of that lawn to native plants, that's a perfect start, you know, at your home. Kind of moving out more on a landscape type area, out in the Shenandoah Valley, up in Pennsylvania, we work a lot with farmers to implement what we call best management practices on those farm fields. So it may be making sure that they put nutrients down based on a nutrient management plan each year, not just throw manure or fertilizer out kind of willy-nilly. We also work a lot on fencing cattle out of streams. As you can imagine, as cattle are moving back and forth across the streams, you know, unfortunately they're making deposits in the stream, which aren't good for anybody or the stream, but they're also wearing the banks down as they get in and out. And so we work a lot with putting buffers in place, putting fences up, and then obviously providing the infrastructure to water those cattle as well in those fields, so they don't have to go back and forth to the stream. And so
I never thought of that.
It's actually one of the most effective practices we have from a cost-effective point of view, and so that's really good. As you kind of come down closer to the water, you know, think about our big cities, kind of in the more Piedmont areas, like, you know, Richmond, Washington D.C., Baltimore, places like that. In those areas, where one of the big things we're doing is tackling that stormwater from all that impervious surface that we have. You know, those driveways, those roadways, interstates, things like that. If you go back to, you know, basically the 1970s and before, a lot of that stormwater didn't have any treatment whatsoever. So we're having to retrofit a lot of those different roadways and ditches and things like that, basically where water flows off, to get some treatment on it before it actually gets to our streams, creeks, rivers, and things like that. New construction, we're trying to make that greener is what it amounts to. And, you know, the Brock Environmental Center here is a great example of that. You know, we have rain gardens to help capture the rainwater as it comes off the roof.
That's pretty neat.
We have cisterns in there to do that. We're actually the first public building in the U.S. that actually uses rainwater for all of our uses in the Brock Center. So whether you're drinking water, or you're taking a shower here, or you're, you know, cleaning up, you're using rainwater to make that happen. And so that's a kind of another unique feature there in terms of what we can do to build smarter so that we have less impact on water quality is what it amounts to. And then another big chunk of this, and where we've made in some ways our most success, is upgrading our wastewater treatment plants. You know, if you live in, you know, even a small city up to our big cities in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, you're probably connected to a wastewater treatment plant in some way, shape, or form. And those are expensive to upgrade, but they're very technologically advanced, and we know how to operate those very efficiently. And as soon as we make those changes in those treatment plants, you know, that's a pollution reduction right away. And so our General Assembly here in Virginia has been very good at funding those upgrades. In fact, we just had a bill this session to deal with some of those upgrades. And the industry that operates those has been good at putting those on the ground. And then the engineering community keeps coming up with neat ideas in ways to continue to reduce pollution. It's just a matter of implementing those at our big wastewater treatment plants.
Okay. All right. And now what about, like we talked about, there's a lot of shoreline here. Marinas, homes. What are those guys? Can they? We talked a little bit earlier, guys, a little bit about some of that, planting trees and being able to protect your waterfront with a living
shorelines, right?
Living
exactly.
shoreline. Okay.
Yeah. So now in Virginia, if your shoreline is eroding and you want to protect that, and obviously it's a good thing to protect that, there's kind of back and forth in terms of, if you have eroding shoreline. One, you obviously want to protect it from a private property standpoint, but also if it's eroding, that means those nutrients and that sediment's getting into the water as well. So we don't want that to happen either. So we want to have healthy shorelines is what it amounts to. So in Virginia now, if your property can support a living shoreline, and this can be a combination of different things. It may be trees, it may be plants, there may be some offshore sill or breakwater as part of it, but we want to integrate as many of those living kind of shoreline components as possible into our shoreline. Now there are places where you just have too much fetch. There's too much wind coming across the water and there's too much energy, and so those may need to be more hardened structures to protect your shoreline. But I think the great thing about trying to protect your shoreline now is the fact that you have a lot more expertise available, you have a lot more opportunities, and you can do things that not only protect your property, which is good for you, but also protect the water quality in the river or the creek you're in and the bay itself.
Okay. The other thing, Chris, this is such a great cruising ground.
Right.
I mean, when we were up in Lake Ontario, I had so many boaters tell me, oh, they can't wait till they retire and they're coming to the Chesapeake Bay. You know why, guys? This is a great place to boat. And for the most part, it's pretty forgiving. It's not like up at the Thousand Islands where it's all rock.
That's right.
You're sand. Hey, still, you don't want to go hard. But that's kind of an economic impact of the bay, in addition to what we talked about earlier with the fishing and even recreational fishing. So does the report kind of look at some of the economic conditions here too?
So we think about economics all the time when it comes to bay restoration, and I think you hit on a really important point. The Chesapeake Bay is an economic engine for the Commonwealth and the region as a whole. You think about everything from the shipping that comes into the two major ports, Hampton Roads and Baltimore. You think about the people who commercially fish for striped bass, for oysters and blue crabs and Atlantic menhaden we talked about earlier. Think about all the people who fish. They're stopping at tackle shops, they're buying gas, they're spending the night here, because not only do some people come retire here, but a lot of people come and fish here for periods of time and things like that. And then also just the fact that other sorts of recreation, people paddleboarding, and we see more and more people on paddleboards each year. People coming into the area and bird watch throughout the year, especially during the migration in the fall, like the raptors. There's all these different pieces of the economy that are really based in some way, shape, or form on the Chesapeake Bay. And then you hit it starting out there, the boating aspect. I mean, fortunately, I was lucky enough to be on my boat this weekend. But our weather is fairly mild. Obviously, we can have some cold times during the winter. But generally, it's an area where you can be on the water in some way, shape, or form just about year round is what it amounts to. And so there are all those different drivers that people don't necessarily think about when it comes to putting together, restoring the bay, and then also seeing the benefits economically to the region. One good example that people don't think about, we talked about shipping earlier, is that if we reduce the amount of sediment coming into the bay each year, we have to dredge the channels to the port less. That's a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
Another thing is, people like to paddle through our underwater grasses. Again, if the water is clear, we're not having as many algal blooms, we don't have as much sediment, that sunlight can get down into the bottom layers of the water better, get to the bottom, and we'll have more grasses. More grasses will then help put more oxygen in the water, have healthier water for all of our fish species. In addition, crabs. In some ways, the most sought after species in Chesapeake Bay, especially from a commercial fisheries wise, they want to migrate into those grass beds when they come back in the summer and fall from being out in the ocean. And so all those things are kind of interconnected, and that's one of the things we really like to drive home with people, is that what we're doing for bay restoration is also helping ensure a healthy and vibrant economy for the region.
I think too, the recreational boaters have become more and more aware of what's going on. I noticed that a couple of marinas I've been at, they have a clean the shoreline day.
Right.
And even some of the transient boaters that have come into the marinas, I saw this one lady walking around picking up stuff.
Right.
And she said, every time we go to a marina, I pick up a few things. Because in some of the places I've been to, they have somebody that goes out and checks their shoreline every day.
Yeah.
And now, there are some regular Clean the Bay days?
Right. So Clean the Bay Day is one of the biggest volunteer events, in the region, and that is based on removing litter from shorelines, either in the bay or tributaries of the bay, or areas that will eventually, if that pollution, that litter is not picked up, will eventually get in the bay. Is what it amounts to. And so we have thousands of volunteers that come out. It's the first Saturday in June each year to help with that. And boaters can actually make a big difference, because obviously there's a lot of places you can walk and pick up, but there's a lot of places where not accessible by walking, or at least very hard to walk to. So someone who has a small boat, has a paddleboard, a canoe, or a kayak, they can get to some of those areas that others can't, and really make a difference. And what I always tell people about Clean the Bay Day is, I think it's one of those great things where you show up in the morning, you see a site that maybe is not the best looking because it has too much trash, too many plastic debris along the shoreline, things like that. You're there for a couple hours and it looks a lot different when you've left. You can really see how you've had that impact in a very short period of time as part of that. And so I think the other thing is, it's a great way to learn more about how you can get involved in bay restoration. Obviously, removing litter is really important, but some of those things we talked about earlier in terms of maybe planting native plants on your lawn, making sure you do a soil test before you fertilize, maybe driving less, things like that are all things that we can do to help move bay restoration forward in some way, shape, or form.
Well, I think that you guys have been doing a great job over the years. I've been boating on the bay, guys, for over 20 years, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it's really looking much, much better.
Well, it's always great when we hear in the summertime, people are like, I couldn't see the bottom 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Now I can.
Yeah.
We didn't see underwater grasses here. Now I can. We didn't see oysters on our shoreline 20 years ago. Now we have oysters on our shoreline. Those are the types of success stories that show that what we are doing is working. We want to speed it up some more, but it shows that we are moving in the right direction. And the investments that we're making, whether it's investments at the federal level, whether at the state level, or whether at the local level, those are showing us benefits in different ways out in the bay and its tributaries, and that's what we all want to see.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you very much. And guys, we could probably talk here for
Days.
Days. When you get back to the marina, talk about this a little bit. Maybe for that Clean the Bay Day, put together a little group. Not only does it help the bay, let's make a social event out of it. It's boating. It's supposed to be fun.
It's another day on the water.
Yeah, we go out, we clean things up, we come back, have a barbecue, a cigar, and a scotch. I mean, come on. Let's get out there and have some fun with this. Well, Chris, hey,
thank you.
Man, thanks a lot. This has really been enlightening.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work you do to help inform the boating community. I mean, obviously there are people who care about the bay.
Yes, it is.
And who are going to make strides to improve it.
All right, guys. Hey, until next time, happy and safe boating to you, your family, and friends.